Hi, I'm in the Walker Test Lab with Scott Gardner of the Tenneco and Walker Emissions Control Sales Team. Scott is going to tell us about step number 7 of proper emissions diagnostics. And step 7 is?
Checking the vehicle's cooling system.
A lot of our viewers might not understand how important the cooling system is in ensuring proper emissions levels.
That's true. The engine must operate within a fairly narrow temperature range in order to control its production of harmful emissions. If it runs either too hot or too cold, chances are you'll face excessive emissions and potentially damage the catalytic converter. To get an accurate picture of the cooling system's condition, we recommend 4 relatively simple tests. First, take a look at the coolant itself. Do you see a lot of floating contaminants or signs of sludging? A quick way to check for contamination buildup in the water jackets is to use an infrared thermometer to check cylinder jacket temperature. With the engine hot, at each of the cylinder cooling jackets, measure the temperature looking for inconsistencies. This will tell you if the engine is running hotter around specific cylinders, which would indicate blockage of cooling passages and the need for a more thorough inspection. Often removal of a freeze plug will reveal excessive rust buildup or contaminant packed into the cooling jacket. This condition would require a thorough system flush or, in extreme cases, hot tank cleaning of the engine block. Another step is to use a digital VOM meter to check for electrolysis. If the system is conducting more than 0.3 volts, you need to resolve this issue to prevent corrosion. One of the most important cooling checks is to pressurize the system to test for an internal leak. Once you have the tester in place and have pressurized it, check for pressure loss. A good rule of thumb is that the system should hold the cap pressure for a minimum of 15 minutes. If the pressure reading drops at all and you're not seeing any coolant on the floor, then you've got an internal leak, either at the head gasket or intake manifold.
Scott, we've heard from some technicians who simply use a 5-gas analyzer to sniff the coolant for the presence of oil or fuel. Does this work?
Well, it's not a very complete check. For example, the approach wouldn't help you detect a leaking intake manifold gasket, since an internal coolant leak at that location wouldn't be affected by the cylinder pressure. So oil or fuel would not typically be forced into the cooling system.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks for joining us. Our next program will cover step 8 in the emissions diagnostic process, checking the fuel system. See you then.